What actually is a motor skill? A motor skill is the learned ability to bring about predetermined results with maximum certainty and time and energy efficiency. Today's video will be going through the syllabus for this topic. So to start with, we have classification of motor skills. The first type of motor skill is fine motor skills. Now these are small motor skills that involve small muscle groups or movements. So that would include doing something like a dart movement, using very small muscles and intricate movements. The second one is gross muscle movements. So that is big, gross means big. So using big muscle groups. So an example would include kicking a soccer ball or a football. You're using your glutes and your quads and your hamstrings. The next type of motor skill is open motor skills. So this kind of skill would occur in an environment that is unstable or unpredictable, and the individual's decision is based off the external factors that determine the timing of the skill. So for example, playing a game of soccer or footy, the way you act or move is determined by the opposition or your teammates' decisions or movements. So you might lead a certain way because your teammate is running that way. This is compared to a closed motor skill, which is performed in a stable and predictable environment, and the individual dictates the timing of the skill. So this is, let's say during practice, you're just passing your teammate the ball back and forth, and you determine when you receive and when you pass. It's not determined by someone else. Another example could be surfing. You might go in a wave pool that is like consistent waves, whereas if you were in a competition out in the swell, that is unpredictable. The next motor skill we have is discrete motor skills. Now these have an identifiable start and finish. For example, kicking a football or a soccer ball has a very clear beginning and end. You have the execution and the follow through. Then we have serial motor skills, which is the linking of discrete motor skills to make a more complicated skill. And then we have continuous motor skills. They have no distinct beginning or end. Now, a very good example of this would be swimming or running. So in freestyle, you join the discrete motor skill of freestyle arms or breaststroke arms to repetitive movements to make a movement in itself, to make a skill in itself. Now we are moving on to the Fitts and Posner's phases of motor learning and how they can be used to develop and improve specific physical skills. There are 3 phases of motor learning. The first one is the cognitive phase of motor learning. This is characterized by the individuals learning what to do, and they do this by making errors. So they make errors and they rely heavily on a coach's feedback. So they require external assistance. Number 2 is the associative phase. Now this is learning how to do a skill. So they've learned what to do. Now they're learning how, and they're doing this by making errors and adjusting it themselves. They detect and adjust the errors themselves and improve their skills by themselves. So an example of an athlete in a cognitive phase would be like a year 1, year 2 Minky level hockey. They require a lot of assistance from a coach and make errors and need to keep learning what to do. Someone in a associative phase would be a year 7 Minky team where they still require a coach, but they're able to adapt and learn themselves throughout gameplay and through training. Now we move on to the third phase, which is the autonomous phase. This is characterized by the athlete doing the skills without consciously thinking about it, and their performance variability is very low. So an example would be an elite soccer player or an elite tennis player like Serena Williams. They still have a coach to be by their side when they need them, but majority of the time they can adjust their errors and adjust their skills according to what they need to do. Now we are moving on to the information processing model during skill performance. So the first step of information processing is identification of the stimulus. So we're going to use the example of playing hockey. So let's say I'm on a team and I am looking for the ball and looking how I'm going to execute my lead to the ball. I need to identify the stimulus. So that is my teammate with the ball. And then I need to understand how am I going to execute myself to receive the ball. So I have a choice to make. So that leads to number 2. I've identified that I need to get the pass from my player over there. Now I need to identify the response and make a decision. Am I going to lead for the ball, or am I going to cover, or am I going to defend an opposition that could intercept that pass? So should I lead or should I defend? Then the third part is the response. Am I prepared to lead or defend? So therefore I get ready to run and I make that decision. So now the next part is actually doing the movement. So now I've decided to lead, so I'm running. The fourth part is feedback, which is used to improve future performance. So maybe I was too delayed and a defender intercepted my pass. So these are the processes that you go through when deciding how to execute a movement in sport or your desired activity. Now we are moving on to the types of feedback and the purpose of feedback. So the first type of feedback is intrinsic feedback or inherent feedback. This type of feedback is based off sensory information that's a natural part of performance. For example, let's use the sport of basketball. When you're going for a basketball shot, you use the sensory information and feedback from your legs and your arms and your follow through to understand how good or bad that shot would have been. You can tell if you use your body correctly whether that shot's going to go in or not. The next type of feedback, so the second type of feedback, is extrinsic feedback or augmented feedback. This is extra information provided to the athlete that is not inherent to the task, and there are multiple underneath this type of feedback. And this type of feedback includes terminal feedback, which is the knowledge of the results or the performance. It occurs after the performance. So after a basketball game, you might have gone for that shot and you missed. So that is terminal feedback. You've seen that you've missed, or you've seen that you've got it in and the points have gone on the board. Then another type is concurrent feedback, which occurs during the performance. So think about your coach, which might say, hey, focus on your elbow when you're shooting that shot, or focus on your knees bending. It occurs during the performance. And then we have something called verbal feedback, and there are multiple types of verbal feedback. The first one is qualitative verbal feedback. So that is saying stuff like, you're doing really well, keep going, your knees are looking great, your elbows are looking great, your follow through is good. Then we have something called quantitative feedback. This is like, guys, you're 10 points up, you're doing really good, or you're 10 points down, you need to hustle. It uses like numbers rather than words. The third one is descriptive feedback, which identifies the errors like, hey, this man is always free, or you're always leading too late, you need to work on that. And then we have something called descriptive feedback, so that's the fourth one, where you identify that error. So you're leading too late, or you're passing too early. And then you identify the error and then you prescribe the solution. So instead of waiting 3 seconds to lead, wait 2. Or instead of passing the ball higher than their head, pass it to their chest. So you give them a solution and feedback. And then finally, we move on to the purpose of feedback. There are 2 purposes of feedback. The first one is to reinforce the learner. So reinforce why they're doing this and why they're learning and why it's important to take on feedback and adjust errors. And the second one is to motivate the learner. So make them understand that the more they practice and the more they learn from the errors, the better they're going to get. And they will move through the cognitive, associative, and autonomous phases of learning. That is everything you need to know in the Motor Learning and Coaching unit for PE Studies Year 11 ATAR syllabus. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope you learned something new, and I will see you in the next video.